Every detail in this story comes from the historical record. A wall of black earth is rising on the horizon, and it is taller than any cloud you have ever seen. The sky is about to turn from blue to gold to brown to black, in that order, in under 20 minutes. Birds are flying south in total silence, hundreds of them, and they are not stopping for anything. You are 12 years old, and you are about to watch static electricity jump between your own fingers in the dark. Your father has already signed papers to leave this land behind, and he has not told you yet. A neighbor's house, 2 miles east, will be empty by morning, the family gone without saying goodbye. Inside your own house, every window will be sealed with wet sheets and flour paste, and it will still not be enough. Somewhere in this county, a child your age is going to breathe in enough dust to die of it, and you will hear about it from someone who knew the family. The well water is going to come up the color of coffee, and your mother is going to boil it anyway because there is nothing else to drink. A truck is going to pull away from a farm down the road, with everything a family owns tied to the back of it, and you are going to stand in your own yard and watch it go. By the time this day ends, the question in your house will not be whether to leave Oklahoma. It will be when. There is a letter folded inside a family Bible, and only one person in this house knows it is there. A schoolroom window is about to turn the color of an old photograph, gold and wrong, in the middle of a clear morning. A teacher is going to stop mid-sentence, chalk still touching the board, and not finish her thought. Wash hanging on a line is going to be torn away and swallowed by the brown air before anyone can catch it. A door left standing open on an empty house is going to mean something, and you are going to understand exactly what, without anyone explaining it to you. The sound of this storm arriving is going to be mistaken at first for a train, on land where no train has ever run. Inside a sealed house, lit only by lamps turned low, a spark is going to jump from a metal table edge to a child's bare hand. None of this is going to be explained to you in advance. It is simply going to arrive. A bedroom window is going to be sealed with a quilt, fingers pushed into the gaps until the wood bites back. A bucket of water, hauled 20 pumps for 1 bucket, is going to be poured over cloth.
여길 떠나야 할 것 같아.
알아. 모두 준비됐어.
아빠, 무서워요.
괜찮을 거야. 함께니까. 가지 마.
함께 가자.
8-year-old boy is going to close his eyes in a dark room, not asleep, simply unwilling to watch. And somewhere past all of it, a decision that has already been made in secret is going to become a decision the whole family has to face together. This is Quiet History at Bedtime, and if this is your kind of story, a subscribe means everything right now. Every detail in this story comes from the historical record. Just relax and feel free to let this play as you drift off to sleep. Now, let us begin. Your name is Connie Dale, and you are 12 years old, and you live on a wheat farm in Cimarron County, in the far northwestern corner of Oklahoma, in a stretch of land where the state, Texas, Kansas, Colorado, and New Mexico all meet at the same point. Your father has already signed papers with a cousin in California, agreeing to come west and work picking fruit if the farm fails this season. He has not told you this yet, but you found the letter folded inside his Bible 2 weeks ago, and you have been carrying that knowledge alone ever since. The letter said the offer would not stand forever, and that he needed to decide before summer. You did not tell your mother you found it. You did not tell your younger brother, Earl, who is 8. You folded it back exactly the way you found it, and you have not opened that Bible since. It is the morning of April the 14th, 1935, and the day begins like most days now begin, which is to say it begins with dust already in the house before anyone is fully awake. You can taste it before you open your eyes, a fine grit between your teeth, settled overnight through the cracks around the window frame, the same window frame your father packed with rags last autumn and the autumn before that. This house was built in 1918, when your grandfather first broke this ground for wheat, in the years when the federal government was paying farmers across the southern plains to plant as much wheat as the land could hold, because Europe was at war and Europe needed bread. Wheat prices during those years climbed past $2 a bushel, more money than this land had ever produced before, and so farmers across 5 states tore up millions of acres of native grassland, the deep-rooted buffalo grass that had held this soil in place for thousands of years, and replaced it with wheat that had roots reaching down only a few inches. For a decade it worked. Then the prices fell, the drought came, and the wind discovered there was nothing left to hold the ground down. You sit up in the bed you share with Earl, and you can see him still asleep beside you, a thin gray line of dust along the crease of his closed eyelids, like he has been crying ash instead of tears. You do not wake him yet. You swing your legs out from under the quilt, careful not to shake loose the dust that has collected along its folds overnight, and you feel the cold floorboards through your socks. The cold is not uncomfortable. It is constant. You have lived with it your entire life, the way the dust is constant, the way the wind against the house at night is constant, a sound so steady you only notice it on the rare occasions it stops. You go to the window and you look out at the yard, and what you see looks almost normal. The sky above the barn is the pale blue of an early spring morning, the kind of sky that 3 years ago would have meant a good day for planting. But you have learned to read this land the way your father reads it, and there is something in the stillness that does not sit right with you. The windmill behind the barn, the one that pumps water for the stock tank, is not turning. There is no wind at all. Not even the dry whisper that usually moves through the yard before dawn. The chickens in the coop are silent too, and that is the part that catches in your chest, because chickens are never silent. Before you go out to the kitchen, you do the small job that has been yours for almost a year now, which is checking the seedling boxes your mother keeps along the inside wall of the lean-to shallow wooden trays where she starts a few vegetable seeds early under glass, hoping to get a head start on the garden before the worst of the spring wind arrives. This morning the glass panes over the boxes are coated with the same fine gray film as everything else, and you wipe each pane with the edge of your sleeve, because a clean pane lets in more light, and more light means the seedlings have a better chance. Underneath the glass, the bean shoots are pale and thin, reaching toward whatever sun they can find, and you think, the way you think most mornings now, that they look the way everyone in this house has started to look, stretched thin and reaching for something that keeps not arriving. You pull on your dress, the same one you wore yesterday and the day before, because there is no point washing clothes more than once a week when the water has to be hauled by hand and rationed by the cupful. You go out to the kitchen where your mother is already awake. Your mother, Edith Dale, is 34 years old, and this morning she is doing what she does every single morning before anyone eats. She is wiping down every flat surface in the kitchen with a damp rag, the stovetop, the table, the windowsill, the tops of the canned goods on the shelf, because if she does not do this every morning, the dust from the night before will end up in the food. She does this without looking up, the same motions in the same order, because some things in this house have become so automatic that they no longer require thought, only repetition. Your father, Walter Dale, is already outside. You can hear him at the well pump, the long, slow creak of the handle. 20 pumps to fill one bucket now, where it used to take 5, because the water table has dropped that much in 5 years of drought. He comes in carrying 2 buckets, and he sets them down by the stove. He says good morning to you in the same flat, tired voice he has used every morning for longer than you can remember. And you say good morning back, and you do not look at his coat pocket, where you know that letter from California has been folded and refolded so many times the creases have gone soft. Breakfast is biscuits made with flour that has had to be sifted twice to get the grit out, and a thin gravy, and there is coffee for your parents. Real coffee, which your father insists on, even though it is one of the only things they still spend cash money on. Because, he says, a man needs one thing in the morning that tastes like it is supposed to. While you eat, your father talks about the wheat. What is left of it? Most of what he planted last fall never came up at all. The seed simply blown out of the ground before it could root, and the few patches that did sprout are stunted, pale green stalks no higher than your ankle in a season when they should already be near your knee. He says the word if 3 times during breakfast. If the rain comes this month. If the wind holds off through planting. If the bank extends the note again past summer. You have started counting these ifs without meaning to, the way you might count the cracks in the ceiling above your bed at night. Earl finishes his biscuit and asks, the way he asks most mornings, whether he can take the slingshot to school today, the one your father carved for him last winter out of a forked piece of cedar fence post. Your mother tells him no, the same answer she gives most mornings, because Miss Hartley has a rule about slingshots after one of the older boys put a stone through the schoolhouse window 2 winters ago, a window that took nearly a month to replace because the glass had to come all the way from Boise City. Earl accepts this the way he accepts most things, with a small sigh and no real argument, and tucks the slingshot back under his side of the mattress where it has lived, unused, for most of that winter. After breakfast, you and Earl walk the 1.5 miles to school, the same one-room schoolhouse that serves every farm family within walking distance. Somewhere between 15 and 20 children on a normal day, fewer now than there used to be, because families have been leaving steadily for 2 years, and the empty desks are starting to outnumber the full ones. The walk takes you past the Pruitt place, the farm closest to yours, and this morning there is something different about it. The front door is standing open. Not wide open, but open enough that you can see straight through to the back wall of the house, and there is no furniture inside. You stop walking. Earl stops beside you. Neither of you says anything for a moment, because you both understand what an open door and an empty house means, even if neither of you has the words for it yet. The Pruitts had a girl in your class, Dorothy, who sat 2 rows ahead of you and who was, until apparently last night or very early this morning, still living 2 miles from your own front door. You did not hear a truck. You did not hear anything. Whatever happened at the Pruitt place happened quietly, in the dark, the way it has been happening to families up and down this road for 2 years now. A slow bleeding away of neighbors that nobody announces and nobody says goodbye to. You start walking again, faster now, and you do not look back at the open door, because looking back at it feels like it might make the same thing true of your own house. The schoolhouse, when you reach it, is exactly as it always is. 1 room, 1 stove in the corner that your teacher, Miss Hartley, lights every morning regardless of the season, because even on warm days the building holds a chill from the dust packed into its walls. There are 16 children in the room this morning, 2 fewer than there were in January. Miss Hartley does not call the Pruitt name during attendance. She simply skips over it, the way she has skipped over 4 other names since the new year began, and nobody asks her to explain. Before lessons begin, Miss Hartley does the thing she does every morning now, which is walk along the row of windows, checking the cloth strips she has tacked along the bottom of each frame, strips meant to catch the worst of the dust that works its way in overnight. This morning she pauses longer than usual at the window nearest your desk, running her thumb along a seam where the cloth has come loose, and she says, mostly to herself, that she will need to ask her brother to bring more tacks from town. You watch her do this, and you think, not for the first time, that Miss Hartley has been doing small repairs like this for as long as you have been in school, patching the same handful of things over and over, the way everyone out here patches the same things over and over, because there is never quite enough of anything to replace rather than mend. The morning lesson is arithmetic, and you work through a page of long division problems. The whole time you are aware of the windows along the east wall, because that is the direction the wind usually comes from. And this morning those windows are letting in more light than usual, a strange gold-colored light that makes the inside of the schoolroom look like it has been dipped in something. You glance up once, and you see that the light outside has changed color in a way you have never seen before. It is not the white-gray of an ordinary dust haze. It is gold, deep and even, the kind of gold a lamp gives off, except the lamps are not lit, and this gold is coming from outside, from the sky itself. Miss Hartley notices it too. You watch her pause mid-sentence, chalk still touching the blackboard, and turn toward the east windows. For just a moment, her face goes still in a way that makes the back of your neck go cold. She does not say anything alarming. She walks to the window, looks out for a long moment, and then turns back to the class. In a voice that is trying very hard to sound ordinary, she says that she thinks it might be best if everyone heads home a little early today, just to be safe, just in case the weather turns. The word weather is doing a lot of work in that sentence, and even at 12 years old you understand that. You gather your things. Earl is already at the door, looking out at that strange gold light, with the kind of open curiosity that only an 8-year-old can still afford, because he has not yet learned what that color means. You step outside, and the gold light is everywhere now, falling across the schoolyard, across the dirt road, across the bare fields beyond, turning everything the color of an old photograph. The air feels different against your skin, charged somehow, the way the air feels right before a summer thunderstorm, except there is still no wind at all. Two of the older boys, the Hendricks brothers, are already running toward the road in the direction of their own farm, and one of them shouts back over his shoulder that their father told them once that a sky like this means something is coming from a long way off. To the north, low along the horizon, there is a line. It is dark, almost black, and it stretches the entire width of what you can see, east to west, with no gap in it anywhere. At first you think it might be a storm cloud, the kind that brings rain, and for 1/2 of 1 second something in your chest lifts at the thought, because it has been so long since rain. But storm clouds do not sit on the ground. Storm clouds have shape and edges, and they move with the sky above them. This thing on the horizon is sitting directly on the earth, low and solid, like a wall, like the edge of the world itself has been painted black and is now being slowly rolled toward you. Miss Hartley is behind you in the doorway, and you hear her say, almost to herself, that she has never seen one that big. You start walking home. Fast at first, and then faster. Earl's hand gripped in yours, his short legs working hard to keep pace. Behind you, the gold light is beginning to dim, the way daylight dims in the half-hour before sunset, except it is not even noon yet, and the wall on the horizon is no longer something you have to squint to see. It is taller than you thought. It is taller than the grain elevator in town, taller than anything you have ever seen standing on this flat land, and it is coming on without sound, without wind, in total silence. That silence is the worst part of all, because every other dust storm you have lived through has announced itself first with wind. This one is not announcing anything. It is simply arriving. You can see the road ahead of you, the Pruitt place with its open door, your own farm another half-mile past that, the barn, the house, your mother's wash hung on the line that morning because the day had started so still and clear that she thought, for once, it might be safe to dry clothes outside. You run. Your lungs burn with the effort of running, and Earl is struggling to keep up, his short legs unable to match your pace. You slow just enough to grab his hand again and pull him along beside you. The light has dropped further now, the gold gone to a strange brownish dusk. Behind you, when you risk a glance over your shoulder, the wall of black has eaten the entire northern sky. It no longer looks like weather. It looks like the sky itself has been replaced by something solid. You think of your mother's wash on the line. You think of the windows at home and whether your father has had time to notice the sky before this thing arrives. You wonder whether 2 minutes will be enough time to do anything at all. The Pruitt house passes on your left, door still hanging open, dark inside. and you do not slow down to look at it this time. There is no time for anything except the next few hundred yards of road. Ahead, you can see your own farm now. The barn, the house, the windmill that was so still this morning, standing motionless against a sky that is rapidly running out of light. And then you see your father. He is in the yard, and he is moving fast, gathering the wash off the line in great armfuls, not folding it, just pulling it down and bundling it against his chest. Your mother is in the doorway shouting something you cannot yet hear over the growing roar that has started behind you, a sound like a train, except there are no trains out here, there have never been trains out here, and the sound keeps building. You reach the yard at almost the same moment the first edge of the wind arrives, and it does not arrive gently. It hits like a physical thing, a wall of pressure that staggers you sideways, and grit slams into the side of your face hard enough to sting. You throw your free arm up across your eyes on instinct. Your father grabs Earl under one arm and drops the wash he was carrying. The wash immediately tumbles away across the yard and vanishes into the brown haze that is rolling over everything now. He half carries, half drags Earl toward the house, shouting at you to follow, and you do not need to be told twice. Inside the house, the change is immediate and total. The kitchen, which was full of pale morning light only minutes ago, is now lit only by the dim glow of the kerosene lamp your mother has already lit and set on the table. Because outside the windows there is nothing now but a churning brown wall, and even that brown is darkening with every passing second, sliding toward black. Your father slams the door and drops the iron bar across it, the bar that is normally only used at night. The sound of the wind against the house changes from a roar to something deeper, a vibration you can feel through the floorboards and up through the soles of your feet. This is the part of the day your family has rehearsed without ever calling it a rehearsal. Every household across this part of the country has by now developed the same routine, because the storms have been coming with increasing frequency for 2 years, and what was once unthinkable has become simply what you do. Your mother is already at the first window with a bedsheet, soaked in the bucket of water your father carried in that morning, the same water that took 20 pumps per bucket and is rationed for drinking. She presses the wet sheet against the window frame, working it into the gaps around the edges where the dry air outside is already finding its way through in thin gray ribbons. You know your job without being told. You go to the second window, the one in the bedroom, and you do the same thing, dragging a folded quilt off the bed and pressing it against the frame, tucking the edges into the gaps with your fingers, feeling the dust already gritty against the wood even though the storm has only just arrived. Earl's job is the door. He is small, but he is good at this, because he has done it before, and he kneels at the base of the door with a rolled towel, pushing it into the gap at the bottom where daylight and dust used to come through freely. Your father moves between rooms, checking each window in turn, tightening what needs tightening. You can hear him counting under his breath, the way he counts everything now, because counting is something to do with your mind when there is nothing left to do with your hands. The light inside the house continues to fail. By the time all 4 windows are sealed as well as they can be sealed, the only light remaining is the lamp on the kitchen table, and it is not enough light to see the far corners of the room. Outside, the wind has reached a pitch that makes conversation difficult. You have to raise your voice to be heard across a room the size of your kitchen, and even then, words come out in fragments, swallowed by the sound of dust scouring against the walls and roof, a sound like sand thrown by the handful, except it never stops. It is constant, thousands of handfuls every second. Your mother lights a second lamp, and then a third, placing them at intervals around the main room. Even with the windows sealed, dust is finding its way in anyway, fine as flour, settling onto every surface. And within 20 minutes of the storm's arrival, there is already a visible layer on the kitchen table, despite the fact that your mother wiped that table clean less than 2 hours ago. Before sitting down, your father crosses to the radio, the one battery set the family owns, kept on a shelf near the stove, and used sparingly because batteries are dear and the signal out here is weak even on a clear day. He turns the dial slowly, and for a long moment there is nothing but a thin static hiss, the same static that seems to be in the air itself today. And then, faintly, a voice breaks through, a man reading what sounds like a market report from a station out of Amarillo, his voice crackling in and out as though the storm itself is trying to swallow it too. Your father listens for a moment, then turns the dial again, searching for a station that might say something about the weather. But every station he finds is the same. Ordinary programs continuing as though nothing unusual is happening anywhere. And after a moment he turns the radio off to save the battery, because whatever this storm is, the radio clearly does not know about it yet. And there is no sense spending power on a voice that cannot tell you anything you do not already know by looking at your own kitchen window. You sit down at the table because your legs are shaking, partly from the run and partly from something else, something that does not have a name you know yet. Earl sits beside you, pressed against your side, and for the first time since this morning he looks his age, which is to say he looks small and frightened and very young. Your father comes to the table and sits as well. And for a moment, none of you say anything, because there is nothing to say that the wind is not already saying for you, louder and more completely than any of you could. This storm, you will learn later, though you do not know it yet sitting at that table, will be remembered as one of the worst dust storms in the history of the southern plains. A wall of soil lifted from drought-stricken farmland, and carried for hundreds of miles, visible from airplanes, dark enough to be seen from the upper floors of buildings in cities far to the east that have never experienced anything like it before. But right now, at this table, in this kitchen, none of that matters. What matters is the lamp flame, which is beginning to flicker in a way that has nothing to do with a draft, because there is no draft. The house is sealed as tightly as 4 people working quickly were able to seal it. The flame is flickering because the air itself is changing. You notice it first as a kind of pressure behind your ears, the same feeling you get when a wagon goes too fast down a steep hill. And then you notice something else, something that makes you go very still. A faint blue spark jumps between your fingers and the metal edge of the table. You pull your hand back, and Earl, who saw it too, makes a small sound and presses closer against you. Your father reaches over and turns down the lamp wick slightly, not extinguishing it, but lowering the flame. He says, in a voice that is trying to be calm, that this happens sometimes, During storms like this, the dust carries a charge, and it is nothing to be afraid of, though you notice he does not look away from the lamp while he says it. What your father is describing, though he does not have the scientific words for it, and neither do you, is a phenomenon that has been reported across the plains during these severe storms. An accumulation of static electricity generated by the friction of billions of dust particles rubbing against each other and against the ground. A charge strong enough to disable car engines, to short out radios, to cause sparks to jump between metal objects and human skin in dark rooms exactly like this one. Some families, you will hear later, have taken to grounding their homes with wires run from doorknobs to iron stakes driven into the earth outside, an attempt to bleed off the static before it builds to the point where touching a metal surface becomes a small, sharp shock. Your family has not done this. Your family, like most families out here, endures it the way you endure everything else, by sitting very still and waiting for it to pass. You remember, faintly, a story your father told once about a neighbor's boy who touched the metal latch of a gate during a storm like this, and felt the shock travel all the way up his arm to his shoulder, a story that was probably exaggerated in the telling, the way most stories told at the supper table tend to be, but that you have never quite forgotten, and that makes you keep your own hands folded carefully in your lap now, away from the table's edge, away from the lamp's metal base, away from anything that might decide to bite. The wind does not pass. Not in the next hour, and not in the hour after that. The light inside the house remains the color of dusk, then the color of true night, even though you know, somewhere underneath all of this, that it is the middle of the afternoon. Your mother moves between the lamps, trimming wicks. At some point she produces, from a drawer you did not know contained anything useful for this, a stack of folded cloths, and she wets each one from the rationed bucket and hands them out, one to each of you, instructing you to tie them over your nose and mouth. This is not the first time you have done this. Every household keeps these cloths ready now, the way other households might keep a fire extinguisher, because breathing this air unprotected for any length of time has consequences that everyone in this county has heard about, even if nobody says the words out loud at the dinner table. Through the cloth, your breathing sounds different to your own ears, closer, more effortful. You find yourself thinking about Dorothy Pruitt's empty desk at school, and about the open door of her house, and about whether her family left because of a storm like this one, or because of something else entirely, some quieter exhaustion that built up over months and years, until one morning the only thing left to do was to stop staying. Earl has gone very quiet beside you. When you look down at him, you see that his eyes are closed, not asleep, but closed the way a person closes their eyes when there is something happening that they would rather not watch, even if watching and not watching make no difference at all in a room this dark. You put your arm around him, and you do not say anything. There is nothing to say that would be true and also comforting at the same time, and you have learned over the last 2 years that when those two things cannot both be true, it is usually better to say nothing at all. You think, sitting there with your arm around your brother, about the seedling boxes in the lean-to, the bean shoots your mother has been nursing along under glass for weeks now, and you wonder whether the glass panes will hold against whatever is hitting the house right now, or whether tomorrow you will find them shattered, the shoots buried under drifts before they ever had a chance to be transplanted into the garden. It is a small thing to be thinking about, with the whole sky gone black outside, but it is the kind of small thing your mind keeps returning to, the way it keeps returning to small things, because the large thing, the storm itself, is too big to hold on to directly, and so your mind keeps sliding off it towards smaller, more manageable worries instead. Somewhere beneath the table, you feel Earl's foot bump against yours, and when you glance at him, you realize he has started counting too, under his breath, the way your father does, though what he is counting you cannot tell, perhaps seconds, perhaps nothing at all. Just the shape of counting itself, something to hold on to with his mind, the way his hands are holding on to the edge of the bench. You find yourself counting along with him without deciding to, matching his rhythm, though neither of you says a number out loud, and somewhere around what might be the 100th count, or might be only the 30th, you lose track entirely and simply sit there, breathing through the damp cloth, your brother's small shoulder warm against yours, the two of you keeping each other steady in a way that does not require either of you to say so. Your mother, between trips to the lamps, sits for a moment at the table herself, and she takes the deck of cards down from the shelf above the stove. The same deck that has been missing the 7 of clubs for as long as you can remember, replaced by a square of cardboard with the number 7 written on it in pencil. She does not deal a hand. She simply holds the deck in her lap, her thumb moving slowly along the edge of the cards, the way a person might hold a rosary, not playing, just holding. Something familiar in her hands while everything else in the room behaves unfamiliarly. You think about asking her to deal anyway, to play a hand of the simple game she taught you when you were younger, something to do with your hands and your eyes besides watch the lamp flame lean sideways in air that should not be moving. But you do not ask, because asking would mean admitting that you want a distraction, and admitting that feels somehow like admitting how frightened you actually are. And you have gotten good these last 2 years at not admitting that even to yourself. Outside, beneath the roar, you think you hear something else, a thinner sound, almost like a voice, and for one strange moment you wonder if it is the wind finding some gap in the walls and singing through it the way wind sometimes does through a fence post with a knot missing. Earl hears it too, and his hand finds yours under the table, gripping hard, and neither of you says anything about it, because saying something about it would mean agreeing that you both heard it, and agreeing to that feels like it might make it more real than it already is. Your father, across the table, has gone still in a different way than before, listening, and after a moment he says, in a voice pitched low so as not to startle anyone, that it is only the wind in the stovepipe, that it does this sometimes when the pressure outside drops fast enough, and that there is nothing in that sound except air moving where air should not be moving. You want to believe him, and mostly you do, but the sound continues for a long while after he says this, rising and falling, almost like breathing, and you find yourself breathing in time with it without meaning to, until your mother reaches over and puts her hand flat on the table in front of you, not holding your hand, just resting hers there, close enough that you can feel the warmth of it, and somehow that is enough to make you stop listening for the sound at all. The wind continues. The lamps continue to flicker. Somewhere outside, beyond the sealed windows and the barred door, the wall of black that you watched roll across the horizon less than 2 hours ago has become the entire world, and there is nothing to do now except sit at this table, in this small circle of lamplight, and wait for it to decide it is finished. Time inside this house has stopped behaving the way time normally behaves. There is no sun to mark its passage, no shadow moving across the floor, only the lamps, and the lamps do not change. The afternoon stretches out into something that feels less like hours and more like a single held breath. You sit at the table with the wet cloth tied over your nose and mouth, and you breathe through it slowly, the way your mother showed you, because breathing too fast through a damp cloth makes you feel like you are not getting enough air, even when you are. The cloth itself is something every household in this county now keeps ready by the door, folded and dry until needed, because the dust carried inside these storms is not ordinary dirt. It is fine enough to work its way into lungs the way flour works its way into the seams of a flour sack, and once it is in, it does not come back out easily. You think again of the empty desk at school, 2 rows ahead of you, and you wonder, not for the first time, whether Dorothy Pruitt's family left because someone in that house had started coughing in a way that did not stop. There have been stories. Not stories told directly to children, but stories overheard, the kind that pass between adults in low voices at the feed store or after church, about babies and old people especially, whose lungs cannot fight off what these storms put into them. A sickness the doctors in town have started calling dust pneumonia, because there is no better name for it yet. You do not say any of this out loud. Earl is still pressed against your side with his eyes closed, and you do not want him thinking about it, even though you suspect, from the stillness in his small body, that he already is. The wind outside has not lessened. If anything, it has found a new register, a higher pitch layered over the deep roar, and you realize after a moment that the higher sound is the windmill behind the barn, the one that stood motionless this morning, now spinning so fast in winds it was never built to withstand that the metal vanes are screaming against their own bearings. Your father hears it too. He stands up from the table, and for a moment you think he means to go outside, to do something about the windmill. Your chest goes tight at the thought of that door opening even a crack into what is out there. But he does not go to the door. He goes instead to the stove, and he checks that the firebox is sealed, because an open flue in a storm like this can pull dust down into the house in a column, the way a chimney can pull smoke up, except in reverse. A sealed flue means a cold stove, which means no hot food and no hot water until this passes. He comes back to the table, and he sits, and this time he says something, raising his voice just enough to be heard over the wind. He says that this one feels different. Bigger, longer. Your mother does not answer right away. When she does, her voice is steady, the voice she uses for things that frighten her, because you have learned that the calmer your mother sounds, the more careful you should be. She says that different does not mean anything by itself. It only means different. But you notice that she does not look at your father when she says it. She is looking at the lamp flame, watching it lean and gutter in air that should not be moving inside a sealed room. And you find yourself watching it too, because watching the flame feels like watching something, anything, that is still behaving the way it is supposed to. The static returns, not as a single spark this time, but as a faint blue light that seems to trace itself along the edges of things. The iron stove, the metal handle of the water bucket, The rim of the lamp itself, a soft glow that should not be possible and that none of you comment on, because commenting on it would mean admitting that the world inside this house has stopped following its ordinary rules. You feel it lift the small hairs on your arms. Earl feels it too, and he opens his eyes for the first time in what feels like an hour, and he looks at his own arm with an expression that is somewhere between fear and a strange kind of wonder, the way only a child can hold both feelings at once. This phenomenon, the static charge that builds inside severe dust storms, has been reported widely enough across the southern plains that some families have begun running a length of wire from a doorknob out through a small gap to a metal stake driven into the yard, an attempt to ground the house the way a person might ground themselves before touching something charged. Your family has talked about doing this. Your father mentioned it once, last winter, after a smaller storm left your mother with a shock sharp enough to leave a small red mark on her hand where she touched the stove. But the wire would have to run through a sealed gap, and every gap in this house is now packed tight with cloth and rags, and so the wire sits coiled in the barn, unused, and the house simply endures whatever the air decides to do. Somewhere outside, faint and almost lost beneath the wind, you think you hear the chickens, a thin, frightened sound coming from the direction of the coop, and you think about the two that were loose in the yard this morning, the ones that wandered out before anyone thought to shut them in properly. You do not say anything about this, because there is nothing anyone can do about it now. And because your father has enough to think about without adding 2 chickens to the list. But you find yourself listening for the sound again anyway, every few minutes, the way you might check on a tooth that aches, unable to leave it alone even though checking does not help. You think too about the Hendricks place, the farm on the other side of the schoolhouse, where the 2 boys ran ahead of you this morning shouting about their father's warning. Their house sits lower than yours, in a shallow fold of land that has always seemed, on ordinary days, like a pleasant place to be, sheltered from the worst of the wind. But you wonder now whether that same low ground might work against them in a storm like this, whether dust settles deeper in a hollow the way water does, filling it from the bottom up, the way the stock tank fills, slow and patient, until there is nowhere left for the air itself to be. You do not know, and there is no way to know, not tonight. And the not knowing sits in your chest alongside everything else you cannot do anything about. One more weight added to a pile that was already heavy before this storm even arrived. The lamp on the table flickers harder, dims to almost nothing, then steadies again, and your father reaches over without a word and turns the wick down further, not because the lamp needs less light, but because a lower flame is less likely to gutter out completely, and a house with no light at all in the middle of a storm like this is a kind of dark you do not want to experience even once. You do not know how long you sit like this. Later, when people talk about this storm, they will describe it lasting for hours, some say as long as 5 or 6 hours of true darkness in the middle of the afternoon, and accounts from towns across the region will describe street lights coming on at 3 in the afternoon, drivers abandoning cars in the middle of roads because they could not see the edge of the pavement, people becoming lost between a house and a barn they had walked between every day of their lives, disoriented within a few hundred feet because there was nothing left to see by. In your house, the only marker of time passing is the level of oil in the lamps, and at some point your mother gets up, moving carefully in the dim light, and refills the lamp on the table from a can kept under the sink because the lamp has burned low enough that refilling it now is safer than risking it going out later. While she is up, she goes to the window where Earl sealed the gap with the towel, and she crouches there for a moment, her ear close to the wall, listening, and when she comes back to the table she says that she cannot hear the chickens anymore, and that this might mean the wind has covered the coop enough to muffle the sound, or it might mean nothing at all, and either way there is no sense guessing about it in the dark. You think about the two loose hens again, picturing them somewhere out there in all of that black, and you find yourself hoping, in the specific and useless way a person hopes about small animals during a disaster, that they found their way under something, a wagon, a step, anything with enough cover to keep the worst of it off them until morning. Earl, beside you, has started to nod off despite everything, his head tipping slowly toward your shoulder and then jerking back upright each time, the way a person fights sleep when sleep is the last thing their body wants to allow given the circumstances. And after the third or fourth time, your mother reaches over and gently guides his head down onto a folded blanket on the bench, and he does not fight it again. You watch him sleep, his face slack in the lamplight, dust still clinging in the creases of his eyelids despite the cloth. And you think that there is something almost unbearable about how easily he can simply stop being afraid the moment his body decides it is tired enough. A trick you have never quite managed yourself. Not during a storm, not during the quiet after one. While she does this, your father talks, quietly, mostly to himself, about the wheat. About how a storm like this, if it is as bad as it sounds, will likely finish off whatever was left standing in the east field, the few thin rows that had managed to sprout despite everything. He does not sound angry when he says this. He sounds like a man doing arithmetic, the same arithmetic he has been doing out loud at breakfast for months. Except now one more number has just been subtracted from the total, and the total was already close to nothing. You think about the letter again, folded inside the Bible, in your parents' room, behind a sealed window with a quilt pressed into its frame. You wonder if your father is thinking about it too, sitting here in the dark with the wind screaming outside and his last field of wheat being stripped bare somewhere out there in the black. You almost say something. The words are right there, close enough that you can feel the shape of them in your mouth. But Earl shifts against your side, and the moment passes, and you tell yourself there will be a better time, later, when the wind has stopped and the light has come back, and it does not feel like the whole world is ending around you. The wind does not stop, not for a long time. But somewhere in the hours that follow, something does change, gradually, almost too slowly to notice at first. The roar outside begins, very faintly, to lower in pitch. The windmill's scream settles back into something closer to its normal complaint, and the lamp flame, which has been leaning and flickering for what feels like the entire afternoon, begins to burn straighter. Your father notices it first. He lifts his head, the way a person does when they hear a sound they have been waiting for, without realizing they were waiting. He does not say anything yet, and none of you do. You simply sit, all four of you, and listen to the wind continue to fall, slowly, the way water drains from a basin, not all at once, but steadily, until the roar that filled every corner of the house for hours has become something closer to an ordinary windy evening. Your mother is the one who finally speaks. She says quietly that she thinks it might be passing. Nobody moves for several minutes after she says this, because every one of you has learned over the last 2 years not to trust the quiet too quickly. Storms like this have been known to ease and then return, a brief calm followed by a second wave, and so you all sit and wait, watching the lamp flame, watching it hold steady, minute after minute, until the steadiness itself becomes a kind of evidence. Eventually, your father stands. He goes to the front window, the one your mother sealed first with the wet sheet, and he peels back one corner of the fabric, just enough to look out, and for a long moment he says nothing at all. Then he says one word. He says that it is dark outside, truly dark, the dark of full night, and none of you have any way of knowing, sitting in this lamplit room, whether that means the storm has simply rolled past into evening, or whether the sun set behind that wall of dust hours ago, and you have all been sitting here in a darkness that was night all along, layered underneath a darkness that was the storm. He does not open the window further. He lets the fabric fall back into place, and he turns from the window, and he says that there is nothing to be done tonight, that whatever is out there in the yard, whatever has happened to the wheat, to the windmill, to the wash that was torn off the line and carried away, all of it will still be there in the morning, and there is no reason to go looking for it in the dark. Your mother begins to prepare what passes for supper, working by lamplight, and the meal is simple, bread and the last of yesterday's beans warmed on a stove that has not been lit since this morning, eaten cold because lighting the stove now, after hours of sealed flue, feels like more trouble than any of you have the strength for. You eat in near silence. The wind outside continues to fall, hour by hour, until by the time your mother begins putting out the lamps, one by one, leaving only a single small flame burning low on the table, the sound outside has become something you almost recognize. An ordinary night wind, the kind that used to put you to sleep before any of this began, back when wind against the house meant nothing more than weather. You lie down in the bed you share with Earl, both of you still in your day clothes because nobody has the energy to change, and you can feel grit between the sheets, fine and constant, the way it always is now, the way it has been for 2 years. Earl falls asleep almost immediately, his breathing slow and even beside you, and you lie awake longer, listening to the wind, waiting for it to rise again, and it does not. It simply continues, steady and low, the sound of a night that is, for the first time in many hours, behaving the way a night is supposed to behave. You think about the letter one more time before sleep takes you. You think about tomorrow and what the yard will look like, and whether your father will go out to the east field at first light to see what is left of the wheat, and whether, after today, the number of ifs at the breakfast table will finally run out. Sleep comes slowly, and when it comes, it does not feel like rest so much as a kind of surrender, the body simply refusing to stay awake any longer, regardless of what the mind still has to think about. At some point in the night, you wake briefly, the way a person sometimes does without any clear reason, and for a moment you do not know where you are. The room unfamiliar in the deep dark, no lamp left burning now, only the faint gray edge of the quilt against the window where your mother's seal has shifted slightly. You lie still, listening, and the wind is there, low and steady, exactly as it was when you fell asleep, and somewhere beneath it, very faint, you think you hear the chickens again, the same thin sound from before, and you decide, in the half-formed logic of someone not fully awake, that this means they are alive, that the sound itself is proof enough, and that decided, you let your eyes close again. Earl shifts beside you, murmuring something you cannot make out, and you put your hand lightly on his shoulder, the way your mother sometimes does for you when you were smaller. And within a few breaths you are asleep again yourself, the wind continuing outside, patient and constant, the way it always has been, the way for as long as you have been alive, it always will be. You wake before Earl does, while the room is still gray with the kind of light that comes before sunrise. And for a moment, lying still under the quilt, you do not remember why your chest feels tight, why your mouth tastes the way it does, thick and metallic, until you breathe in and feel the grit catch in your throat, and it all comes back at once. You sit up slowly. The house is quiet in a way it was not quiet yesterday. No wind pressing against the walls. No roar, just the ordinary small sounds of a house at dawn. Your father's footsteps somewhere near the kitchen, the creak of a floorboard. Ordinary sounds that yesterday would have meant nothing, and that this morning feel like small miracles. You get up without waking Earl, and you go to the window, and you pull back the quilt that has been pressed into the frame since yesterday afternoon, and what you see on the other side of the glass does not look like your yard. It looks like a yard that belongs to someone else, a yard that has been buried. The drift against the side of the house is taller than the windowsill, a smooth, curving wave of dust that has piled up against the wall, the way snow piles up in a blizzard. Except this is not snow, this is soil, the soil of someone's field, possibly your own field, possibly a field 2 counties away. Because the wind that carried this storm came from the north and west, sweeping up dust from farms across Kansas, Colorado, and Texas, as well as Oklahoma, mixing it all together into one undifferentiated mass and depositing it here, against your house, in drifts that in some places will be measured not in inches but in feet. The sky above is a strange pale color, not the gold of yesterday's onset, and not the black of the storm itself, but a washed-out, hazy white, the sun visible only as a dim smear of brightness with no clear edges, the way it might look through a piece of frosted glass. You go to wake your parents, and you find your father already dressed, already at the door, and he is doing something you have seen him do only a handful of times before. He is tying a cloth over his nose and mouth before going outside, the same kind of cloth you wore yesterday inside the house, because the air outside this morning, he says, is not yet safe to breathe without it. He opens the door, and a small cascade of dust slides in across the threshold, fine as sifted flour, and beyond him you can see the yard properly for the first time, and it takes your breath away in a way that has nothing to do with the dust in the air. The wash that was torn from the line yesterday is gone, not scattered, gone, vanished entirely, carried off somewhere by the storm, and the line itself, the wire your mother has used every wash day for as long as you can remember, is sagging, half buried under a drift that has formed along the fence line, a drift that has reshaped the entire eastern side of the yard into something with new hills and new valleys, none of which existed yesterday morning. The chicken coop is still standing, but the door to it has been forced open. And as you watch, 2 chickens emerge, picking their way uncertainly across the new landscape, leaving small footprints in dust so fine it barely holds a shape before the lightest breeze smooths it away again. You count them as they come out. the way you have been counting things since yesterday without quite meaning to, and you get to 4 before you stop, relief moving through your chest in a way you do not examine too closely. All 4 hens are accounted for, even the 2 that were loose in the yard yesterday morning, the same 2 you thought about during the worst of the storm, wondering whether they had found shelter. One of them has a wing held slightly oddly, not broken, just stiff, the way a person might hold an arm after sleeping on it wrong. And your mother says when she sees it that it will work itself out by afternoon, the way most small hurts out here do, given enough time and no further interference. Earl crouches down near the hens, scooping handfuls of dust away from where it has drifted against the base of the coop, clearing a path so they can move more freely, and for a few minutes he is entirely absorbed in this task, the kind of small, useful work that seems to settle something in him after a long night of being frightened. Your father walks out into the yard, and you follow him as far as the doorway, and you watch him make his way toward the barn, his boots sinking ankle-deep with every step, the dust closing back in behind him almost as quickly as he displaces it, the way water closes behind a boat. The barn itself looks intact from here, though one of the large doors has been pushed partway open, and dust has drifted inside through the gap, a long pale tongue of it reaching across the dark floor of the barn toward the stalls where your 2 mules are kept. You hear your father's voice from inside, calling out, and though you cannot make out the words clearly, the tone of it is relief, not alarm. And a moment later he leads both mules out into the yard, and they stand there blinking in the strange white light, their coats gray with dust, their eyes rimmed with it, but alive, both of them uninjured. This matters more than almost anything else this morning could matter. A farm without its mules is a farm that cannot be worked at all, not for plowing, not for hauling water, not for getting to town. And you can see something ease, just slightly, in the line of your father's shoulders when he confirms that both animals survived the night. Your mother comes out behind you now, her own cloth tied over her face, and together the 3 of you, your mother, and Earl, who has woken and stumbled out to join you, stand in the doorway and look at what used to be your yard. The windmill, the one that screamed all through yesterday afternoon, has stopped turning again, but not the way it stopped the morning before, in stillness. One of its blades is bent, twisted at an angle that means it will not turn properly again without repair, and your father, when he sees it, simply stands and looks at it for a long moment before turning away. He walks toward the well, and this is the moment that matters most, more than the wash, more than the windmill, because the well is where your water comes from, all of it. Drinking water, cooking water, washing water, every drop that keeps 4 people and 2 mules and a flock of chickens alive on this farm. He works the pump handle, slowly at first, and nothing comes. He works it again, harder, and you hear a sound, a thick, heavy sound, very different from the clean splash you are used to hearing. And then water begins to come. Except it is not water the color you know water to be. It comes up brown, not muddy brown the way water sometimes looks after heavy rain, but a deep, opaque brown, almost the color of coffee with cream stirred into it, and it keeps coming that color, bucket after bucket, because the storm has driven so much dust into the ground around the wellhead and likely into the water table itself, that the well is now drawing up water mixed with the same soil that buried your yard overnight. Your mother looks at this water for a long moment, Then she says that it will have to be boiled and boiled again, and that you will strain it through cloth before drinking it, and that this is what it is for now, and there is no use standing here looking at it. This is not the first time water has come up discolored after a storm. It has happened before, smaller versions of this same thing, and each time the answer has been the same. Boil it, strain it, drink it anyway, because the alternative is not drinking at all, and that is not an alternative that exists out here. You spend the morning in the kind of work that has no name because it is simply what happens after a storm like this. You and Earl are given brooms, the stiff-bristled kind usually used for sweeping the barn floor, and you are sent to clear dust from the porch, sweeping it off the edge in great soft drifts that immediately begin to be replaced by more dust sliding down from the drift against the house. It feels, after the first hour, like a task with no end, because every bit of progress is matched almost exactly by new dust shifting and settling into the space you have just cleared, and you understand, without anyone explaining it to you, that this is not a job you finish. It is a job you simply do every day for as long as you live in a place like this, the way you eat or sleep or breathe. Midway through the morning, you hear a voice calling from the road, and you straighten up to see Mr. Hendricks walking toward your yard, his own 2 boys trailing behind him, all 3 of them moving with the slow, careful gait of people picking their way across ground that has changed shape overnight. Mr. Hendricks stops at the edge of your yard, not coming further the way neighbors do out here when they have come only to check on something rather than to visit properly, and he calls out to ask whether your family came through all right. Your father comes around from the side of the barn, wiping his hands on his trousers, and the 2 men talk for a few minutes, standing several yards apart, raising their voices slightly to be heard, the way people have learned to talk to each other these last 2 years, never quite closing the distance, as though closing it might somehow make whatever is happening to the land more real than it already is. You catch pieces of what they say. The Hendricks place came through with less damage than yours, their house sitting slightly higher than you had remembered, though one of their outbuildings lost part of its roof. Sheets of tin peeled back and carried off the way your mother's wash was carried off, never to be seen again. Mr. Hendricks says that he heard on the battery radio before it went quiet last night that the storm carried all the way to Oklahoma City, and beyond that to towns in Missouri and Illinois, places that have never had dust like this before, and that newspapers out east are already calling it something, though he cannot remember exactly what. Your father asks, carefully, in the flat voice he uses for things that matter to him, whether Mr. Hendricks has heard anything about families leaving. Mr. Hendricks is quiet for a moment, and then he says that the Bennett family, 2 farms past the schoolhouse, loaded up 2 nights ago, before this storm even hit. He heard they were headed toward New Mexico, though nobody is certain. Neither man says anything else about it. The conversation moves back to ordinary things, the state of the well water, whether anyone has heard what the wheat looks like further down the county. After a few more minutes, Mr. Hendricks and his boys continue on, walking the road toward town, where he says he needs to see about getting word to his brother, who lives on the Kansas side, and who Mr. Hendricks has not been able to reach by telephone since the lines went down sometime yesterday afternoon. You watch them go, 3 figures growing smaller against the pale drifted road, and you go back to sweeping, though your mind is no longer entirely on the broom in your hands. You think about the Bennett family, who you do not know well, 2 grades ahead of you in school, and you think about how their leaving 2 nights before this storm means that whatever decision they made was made for reasons that had nothing to do with yesterday at all, which means that the storm yesterday was not the only thing pushing people toward the road. It was simply the loudest thing, the thing that happened all at once instead of slowly, the thing everyone could point to and say that is when it became too much. But for the Bennetts, and probably for other families too, families you do not know about, the too much had already arrived before the storm, quietly, the way it arrived in your own house 2 weeks ago, folded inside a Bible, waiting. Your father spends the morning at the East Field, the field where the last of the wheat was struggling to grow, and when he comes back, just before noon, he does not say much. He sets down the tools he took with him, and he washes his hands and face at the basin, using water that has already been boiled and strained once, and he sits down at the table, and after a while he says that the field is gone. Not damaged, gone. The thin green stalks that were there yesterday, the ones that had survived against every expectation, have been stripped completely, scoured down to bare, drifted earth, and what remains of the topsoil itself, the soil his father broke for the first time in 1918, has been lifted and carried away to become someone else's drift, in some other yard, in some other county, the way your own yard is now partly made up of soil that used to belong to fields in Kansas and Texas and Colorado. Your mother does not say anything for a long moment. Then she asks, quietly, "What is left?" Your father is quiet too, for long enough that you find yourself holding your breath without meaning to. Then he says that there is the garden plot, the small fenced area behind the house where your mother grows vegetables in years when there is enough water. And that plot, sheltered somewhat by the house itself, has fared better than the open field. And there is the seed stored in the barn, enough for another planting if there is another planting. And then he says, and this is the moment you have been waiting for since you found the letter 2 weeks ago, though you did not know until this exact second that you were waiting for it, that he thinks it is time to talk. All of you, tonight, after the work is done and the animals are settled and there is nothing left to distract from the conversation that has been sitting unspoken in this house for longer than anyone has admitted out loud. He does not say the word California. He does not need to. You can see it in the way your mother's hands go still on the table, in the way Earl, who does not know about the letter, who knows nothing except that something important is being decided, looks from one parent to the other with the wide, careful eyes of a child who has learned to read a room before he has learned to read very much else. The afternoon continues much as the morning did. There is water to boil, dust to sweep, animals to feed from stores that are themselves coated in a fine gray film that has to be brushed away before the mules will eat. The work does not stop for what was said at the table, because the work never stops, regardless of what is being decided underneath it. But something has shifted. You can feel it in the air of the house itself, the way you can feel a change in weather before it arrives. And you find yourself, more than once during the afternoon, looking toward your parents' room, toward the shelf where the Bible sits, and wondering whether, tonight, the letter that has been folded and refolded for 2 weeks is finally going to come out into the light, where everyone can see it. In the late afternoon, your mother sends you out to the garden plot to see what, if anything, can be salvaged before whatever is left finishes dying under the new layer of dust that has settled across it. You kneel at the edge of the plot, brushing soil away from the rows with your bare hands. And beneath the gray film you find a scattering of greens, small and bent but alive. A few bean plants and the tops of some carrots that had been planted early. You work for the better part of an hour, clearing what you can, and by the end you have a small basket of vegetables that are not quite ready. The same kind of not quite ready you will become familiar with in the weeks ahead. Things picked early because waiting is no longer a luxury anyone out here can afford. While you work, Earl comes to sit nearby, not helping exactly, but keeping you company in the way he sometimes does, picking up small stones and turning them over in his hands, examining each one before setting it down again in a neat little row along the edge of the garden fence. He asks you, without looking up from his stones, whether you think it will rain soon. You tell him you do not know because it is true, and because lying to him about something that's small feels, after everything else today, like it would not be worth the effort. He nods, the way he nods at most answers adults give him, accepting it without quite understanding it, and goes back to his stones, and the two of you stay like that for a while, the light beginning to lengthen and soften toward evening, the air calmer than it has been in longer than either of you can remember, the whole yard quiet in the particular way a place is quiet after it has been through something enormous and has not yet decided what to feel about it. Evening comes slowly, the way it always does now in the days after a storm, the light fading through that same hazy white that has not fully cleared since morning, the sun setting somewhere behind a sky still thick with suspended dust that will take days, sometimes longer, to settle completely. You help your mother with supper, and the kitchen feels different tonight, not because anything has changed in how it looks, but because of what everyone in the room knows is coming after the dishes are cleared. Supper itself is quiet. Beans again, and bread, and a small amount of salt pork that your mother has been saving, and nobody comments on the fact that she has chosen tonight, of all nights, to use it. You recognize the salt pork. It came from the last hog your family slaughtered back in the fall, an animal you helped feed all summer, and your mother has been rationing the meat from it carefully ever since, a small piece here and there to flavor a pot of beans, stretching it as far as it will go. That she has chosen to use a larger piece tonight, without explanation, feels like its own kind of announcement. The way certain meals in this house have always meant more than the food itself. Earl notices the meat too, and for a moment his face brightens in the simple, uncomplicated way an 8-year-old's face brightens at the prospect of something good to eat, and you watch your mother watch him notice it, something passing briefly across her own face that you cannot quite name, somewhere between tenderness and a kind of sorrow, gone again before anyone but you could have caught it. Earl eats quickly, the way he always does, but he keeps glancing at your father, then at your mother, then back at his plate, and you realize he has picked up on the tension in the room even if he does not understand its shape yet. When the dishes are done, your mother does not light a fourth lamp the way she sometimes does for evening sewing. She leaves just the one on the table, the same low flame from last night, and the four of you sit around it the way you sat around it during the storm, except this time the wind outside is ordinary, and the only thing filling the room is silence. Your father is the one who breaks it. He says that he has something to tell all of you, and that he should have told you sooner, and that he is sorry he did not. He gets up, and he goes to the shelf where the Bible sits, and he takes it down, and from inside it he removes a folded piece of paper, and you watch him do this with a strange feeling in your chest. because you already know exactly what that paper is and exactly how many times it has been folded and unfolded, because you have held it yourself in secret more than once. He sets the paper on the table, but he does not unfold it yet. Instead, he tells you about his cousin Pete in California, in a town near Bakersfield, who wrote to him back in February with word that there is work there, picking fruit, oranges and lemons mostly, for growers who need hands year-round because California's growing season does not stop the way Oklahoma's does. He says that the pay is not much, $1 a day, sometimes less, depending on the crop and the season, and that families who go out there often have to move from camp to camp, following the harvest from one valley to another, living in tents or in whatever shelter the growers provide, which is not usually much. He says this plainly, without trying to make it sound better than it is, and you can tell that this plainness is deliberate, that he has decided tonight is not a night for softening anything. Then he unfolds the paper, and he says that he wrote back to Pete in March, and that Pete wrote again 2 weeks ago, and that the second letter, the one folded inside this Bible, is Pete's answer, an offer of space in the truck Pete and 2 other families are taking west next month, room for 1 more family if you want it, and work waiting when you arrive, at least for the first few weeks while everyone gets settled. He reads a little of the letter out loud, picking through it slowly in the lamplight. Pete writes that the camps near Bakersfield are crowded, more crowded every month, with families arriving from Oklahoma and Texas and Arkansas faster than the growers can find places to put them, and that some families end up pitching tents along irrigation ditches when nothing else is available. Pete writes that there is a school nearby, of sorts, though it meets irregularly depending on the harvest, and that the local children sometimes treat the new arrivals unkindly, a detail your father reads more quietly than the rest, and one that makes your mother glance, just briefly, toward you and Earl before looking back down at the table. Your father folds the letter part way, as though deciding whether to read more, then continues, and says that Pete writes the work itself is steady enough through most of the year, oranges in winter, other fruits through spring and summer, and that a family willing to work hard, all of them, parents and children both, can usually make enough to get by. Though getting by, Pete is careful to write, does not mean the same thing in California that it meant here. Your mother asks how long ago this second letter arrived. Your father says 2 weeks, and for a moment nobody says anything, and you feel your own face go warm because you know something neither of your parents knows yet, which is that you have known about this letter for exactly as long as your father has had it. You almost speak then. The words are right there again, the same way they were the night before, sitting at this same table in the dark, with the storm howling outside. But before you can decide whether to say anything, your mother speaks first, and what she says surprises you. She says that she knew there was a letter, not the contents, not the offer, but that something had arrived, because she has lived in this house with your father for 14 years, and she knows the difference between an ordinary letter and one that a man carries folded in his coat pocket for 2 weeks without explanation. Your father looks at her for a long moment, and something passes between them that you do not fully understand, something that belongs to the 14 years they have been married, and not to the 12 years you have been alive. And then he says that he has been trying to decide how to tell you both, you and Earl, without it sounding like the end of something. Earl, who has been listening to all of this with the careful stillness of a child trying very hard to understand a conversation that is mostly happening above his head, asks if you are moving to California. Nobody answers him right away. Then your father says that he thinks so. That after yesterday, after the east field, after the well water coming up the color it came up this morning, he does not see another planting season in this land, not one that would be worth the seed it would take to try it. He says that the bank holds the note on this land, and that the note is due in full at the end of summer regardless of whether there is a crop to sell, and that a man can only ask for so many extensions before the bank stops granting them. And he believes, though he does not say it as a certainty, that this summer is likely the last one the bank will extend. Your mother asks about the house, about the things in it, about 14 years of a life that exists, in part in the shape of this kitchen, this table, the quilt on your bed, the garden plot out back that has, against everything, produced vegetables most summers even in the driest years. Your father says that the house will likely be sold or simply left the way the Pruitt place was left, and the thought of your own front door standing open the way the Pruitt's door stood open yesterday morning sends a small cold feeling through your chest that has nothing to do with the temperature in the room. He says that a truck can only carry so much, that Pete's letter was specific about this, that the truck making the trip west is already carrying 2 families' worth of belongings, and that whatever your family brings will have to fit into the space remaining, which is not much, perhaps what would fill the bed of a single wagon, no more. This is the moment the conversation stops being about whether to go and becomes instead about what to take, and the shift happens so quietly that you almost do not notice it happening. The way the wind shifted yesterday from stillness to roar without any moment in between that you could point to and say, "There, that is when it changed." Your mother begins, almost without seeming to decide to, listing things out loud. The good quilt, the one her own mother made, that one comes. The heavy iron stove obviously stays, because it could never fit and would not be needed in a place where Pete's letter says the work camps provide their own cooking arrangements, basic as they are. She moves on to the kitchen shelf, naming items almost under her breath, the way she names things when she is doing inventory, a habit from years of stretching supplies between trips to town. The good knife comes, the mixing bowl, the blue one comes. The canning jars, most of them, stay, because there is nothing left to put in them this year, and a jar without something in it is just glass to carry. Your father, listening to this, adds that the tools he can carry by hand, the small hand tools, a hammer, a few wrenches, a handsaw, should come because Pete's letter mentioned that work in the camp sometimes extends beyond the fields, repair work, odd jobs, anything a man with his own tools can pick up between harvests when the fruit itself is not yet ready. You think, listening to this, about the seedling boxes in the lean-to, the bean shoots your mother has been nursing along under glass since before the storm, and you wonder whether anyone has thought about them yet, whether they are something that gets listed too, or something that simply gets left, the way the doll on your shelf is going to be left, the way so many small things are apparently going to be left. You ask, finally, breaking into a pause in the conversation, what will happen to the seedlings? Your mother looks at you for a moment, and something in her expression softens slightly. The first softening you have seen all evening, and she says that she had not thought of them, not yet, but that perhaps if the boxes are small enough, they could ride on top of whatever else goes in, wedged somewhere safe, given a little water along the way. She says it without much conviction, the way a person says something they want to be true more than they believe it will be. And you understand, even as she says it, that the seedlings probably will not survive a journey like the one ahead, jostled in the back of a truck for days under an open sky. But you are glad she said it anyway. Glad that for a moment the conversation included something small and green and growing, instead of only things that are ending. Your father says the mules will likely be sold here before you leave, because a truck cannot carry mules, and because the money from selling them, along with whatever can be gotten for the rest of the farm equipment, the plow, the seed drill, tools that took your grandfather years to acquire and that are now worth, in a county full of families all trying to sell the same things at the same time, far less than they once were, will be needed for the trip itself, for gasoline, for food along the way, for whatever it costs to start over in a place where you currently have nothing. You think about the mules, the two of them standing in the yard this morning, dust-covered but alive, and you think about how strange it is that surviving the storm and being sold are not, in the end, very different outcomes for an animal on a farm that is leaving. Earl asks, in a small voice, what will happen to the chickens? And your father says that the chickens too will likely be sold or given to a neighboring family who is staying, one of the families that has decided, for whatever reason of their own, to try to hold on to this land a little longer. The conversation continues like this for a long while, moving through the house room by room, almost, deciding the fate of things that have simply existed, unquestioned, for your entire life. The table you are sitting at, the chairs, the lamp itself, the one currently lit, which your mother says, after a moment's thought, should come, because a lamp is small, and a lamp is useful everywhere. At some point, your father turns to you and Earl directly, and he says that he knows this is hard to hear, and that he is not asking either of you to be happy about it, only to understand that this is not a choice anyone wanted to make, but a choice the land itself has, in a way, made for all of you, over these last 2 years, one storm at a time, until last night's storm became the one that finally tipped the scale all the way over. You want to say something about the letter, about how you have known for 2 weeks, about how you have been carrying this same weight, alone, in silence, the entire time your father was carrying it in his coat pocket. But looking at him now in the lamplight, you understand something you did not understand 2 weeks ago, which is that he was not hiding this from you to protect a secret. He was hiding it because he had not yet found a way to say it out loud to himself, let alone to his children. And the letter sat folded in that Bible, not because it was being concealed, but because unfolding it meant making a decision real. So you do not say anything about the letter. Instead, you ask when. When are you leaving? Your father says that Pete's truck is leaving in just under 3 weeks, that this gives you time to do what needs doing, to sell what can be sold, to pack what is coming, to say whatever needs saying to neighbors who are staying behind, the ones who are left, fewer every season, but still some. 3 weeks, you sit with that number, the way you sat with the number of ifs at breakfast yesterday morning. Except this number does not feel like an if at all. It feels like the first solid thing anyone in this house has said in longer than you can remember. The first sentence that does not have a question folded inside it. Earl asks one more question before the conversation winds down. The kind of question only a child would think to ask in a moment like this. He wants to know if there is an ocean in California, and whether, once you arrive, you might be able to see it. Your father says that he believes there is somewhere not too far from where Pete lives, though he has never seen it himself and cannot say for certain how close it is to the camps. Earl seems satisfied with this, filing it away the way he files away most new information, as a fact to be examined later, and he goes back to turning one of his stones over in his fingers, the same stones he collected in the garden that afternoon. You think about an ocean, something you have only ever seen in the pages of a school book, a wide blue nothing stretching to the edge of a page, and you try to imagine it as a real thing, water enough to drown the entire county, water enough that nobody would ever need to count pumps at a well again. The thought does not quite take shape in your mind, the way some things refuse to take shape until you have actually stood in front of them, but you find yourself returning to it anyway, turning it over the way Earl turns over his stones. The lamp burns low. Outside, the night is quiet, the wind no more than an ordinary breeze moving across a yard reshaped overnight into something unrecognizable, and inside, around this small table, your family sits together in a silence that feels different from every other silence this house has held over the last 2 years. It does not feel like waiting anymore. It feels for the first time in longer than you can name, like the waiting is over, and something else, something with an actual shape to it, even if that shape is uncertain and far away and made up mostly of $1 a day picking fruit in a place none of you have ever seen, has finally begun. The 3 weeks that follow move differently than any 3 weeks you have lived through before. Each day has a shape to it now, a list of things that must happen before the truck comes, and the list is long enough that there is little time left over for anything else. The mules are sold first, to a family 2 farms over who are staying, at least for now, and who need a second pair of hands for plowing what little ground they intend to try again this year. You watch them led away down the road, and you tell yourself it does not feel like much, because telling yourself that is easier than the alternative. The chickens go next, most of them, to the same family, though your mother keeps back 4 hens in a small crate, because Pete's letter mentioned that some families in the camps keep a few chickens if they can, for eggs, and 4 hens, your mother decides, will fit in a crate, and a crate will fit in the truck, and eggs are eggs wherever you are. The plow and the seed drill, and most of the larger tools are harder to sell. Every family within 20 miles is trying to sell the same things for the same reasons, and the man from town who comes out to look at your father's equipment offers prices that make your father go quiet in a way you have learned means he is doing arithmetic he does not like the answer to. In the end, the plow sells for less than half of what your father hoped, and the seed drill does not sell at all and stays behind in the barn because there is no time left to find another buyer and no room in the truck even if there were. The garden plot behind the house gets harvested early, everything pulled up before it is fully ready, because your mother says it is better to eat small vegetables now than to leave them in the ground for whoever comes after, and so for several days you eat things that are not quite what they should be. Carrots the size of your finger, greens picked before they have properly grown, and nobody complains, because complaining about food in a house that is about to leave most of what it owns behind feels like complaining about nothing at all. One afternoon during that first week, you go out to the lean-to to check on the seedling boxes, the way you have checked on them most mornings since the storm. The glass panes survived, mostly, though one corner of one pane has a long crack running through it, and through the crack you can see that the bean shoots have grown taller than they were, reaching for the light the way they always do. unaware of anything that has been decided around them. Your mother comes out while you are looking at them, drying her hands on her apron, and she stands beside you for a moment without saying anything. Then she says, in a voice that is quieter than her usual voice, that she thinks the boxes are too heavy in the end and too awkward to bring, and that the chutes themselves would not survive the trip regardless, jostled and starved of water for days in the open bed of a truck. She says this the way she said the thing about the seedlings riding on top of the load, without much conviction, and you understand that she has been thinking about this since that night at the table, turning it over the way you have been turning over the idea of an ocean, and that she has arrived, finally, at the answer she probably knew from the start. Instead, she crouches down and begins transplanting the strongest of the shoots directly into the garden plot, into the gaps left by the vegetables you already harvested, working quickly with her hands, pressing soil around each small stem. She tells you, while she works, that the Pearsons, the family who bought your mules, have said they will keep an eye on the place until it sells or until someone else moves in, and that whoever ends up here, if anyone does, might at least find something already growing when they arrive. You help her with the last few shoots, your hands working alongside hers in the soil, and neither of you says much. And when you are finished, the garden plot has a thin scattering of new green across it, small and uncertain, the kind of thing that might survive and might not, planted by people who will not be here to see which. You spend an afternoon going through the things in your own room, deciding, with your mother's help, what comes and what does not. There is not much. A few items of clothing, mended so many times that the original cloth is barely visible underneath the patches. A small wooden box your grandfather made that holds, among other things, a marble, a length of ribbon, and a photograph of your mother as a young woman, taken before you were born, in a town she left behind, the same way she is about to leave this one. The box comes. Most of the clothes come. A doll you stopped playing with 2 years ago, but never quite got rid of, does not come, and you leave it on the shelf in your room, not thrown away, just left. The way the Pruitts left their furniture, the way this whole county is slowly filling up with rooms full of things that nobody decided to throw away. Exactly. But that nobody decided to keep either. In the final week, neighbors come by, the ones who are left. Some are staying, for now, the way the family who bought your mules is staying. Some, you learn, are leaving too, in the same general direction, though not on the same truck, scattered toward California and Arizona and wherever else word has reached that there might be work. Mr. Hendricks comes by on one of the last afternoons, this time with his wife and both boys, and this visit lasts longer than most. The two families sitting together on the porch steps while the light goes gold and then gray over the yard. The Hendricks boys, the same two who ran ahead of you toward home on the morning of the storm, sit a little apart from you and Earl at first, the way boys that age often do. But eventually one of them, the older one, asks Earl if he wants to see something, and the two of them go off toward the barn together, and you can hear them laughing about something a few minutes later. The kind of laughing that belongs to children who have not yet learned that a goodbye is happening. Mrs. Hendricks and your mother talk quietly, the way women talk on porches, about practical things mostly, what to do with linens that cannot be packed, whether the Hendricks family might want any of the canning jars that are staying behind, since jars are useful to anyone with a garden, regardless of whether there is anything yet to put in them. Mr. Hendricks and your father do not talk much at all. They sit together in the kind of silence that exists between men who have known each other a long time, who have helped each other with harvests and broken down wagons and, more recently, with digging out drifted fence lines after storms, and who do not need words to understand what this particular afternoon is. Before they leave, Mr. Hendricks stands and shakes your father's hand, the way men do, and he says, simply, that he hopes California is good to your family, and that if your father ever finds his way back through this country, the Hendricks place will still have a chair for him. Your father says something back, quietly, that you do not quite catch, and the two men do not say anything else, and that is the whole of it. The way these things tend to be out here, weight carried in very few words. You watch the Hendricks family walk back down the road as the light fades, the two boys running ahead the way they always do, and you think that this is probably the last time you will ever see them, though nobody has said that out loud, and you find that you are not sure how you feel about it, only that you feel it, the way you have felt so many things these last few weeks without quite having names for any of them. These visits are quiet. Nobody makes a large event of them. People come by in the late afternoon, sit for a while, talk about ordinary things, the weather, which has been calmer since the big storm, the price of this or that, and somewhere in the conversation, almost as an aside, someone says that they will miss having you down the road, and someone else says that they hope California treats you well, and that is the whole of it. The entire goodbye folded into a sentence or two and then set aside, the way you might set aside something too heavy to hold for very long. The night before the truck comes, you do not sleep much. You lie in the bed you share with Earl, in a room that is mostly empty now, the walls bare, the shelf empty except for the doll, and you listen to the house the way you have listened to it your whole life, the small sounds it makes settling in the cool of the evening, sounds you have heard every night of your life, and that you realize, lying there, you are hearing for one of the last times. Earl is already asleep beside you, his breathing slow and even, the way it always is, and you think about how he will not remember this house the way you will. He is 8. In 10 years, this room, this bed, this particular quality of darkness will be something he half remembers, a shape without much detail. You are 12, and you understand that you will remember it differently, more completely, for longer, and you are not sure yet whether that is a good thing or not. In the morning, the truck arrives early, while the light is still gray and the air is cool in the particular way it is only cool for an hour or two before the day's heat and dust settle in. Pete is driving it, a man you have met only twice before, and with him are the two other families already loaded in among their own belongings, making room as best they can for what your family is bringing. Loading the truck does not take long. There is less to load than you expected somehow, even though you spent 3 weeks deciding what would come. The wooden box, the quilts, the crate with 4 hens, who complain loudly about the whole process. The lamp, wrapped in a blanket, a small trunk of clothes. The loading goes quickly, the way it always does when there is simply not enough left to make it slow. Your father takes one last walk around the house, alone, while the rest of you wait by the truck, and you watch him go from room to room through the windows, not doing anything, just walking through, the way a person walks through a place they are trying to fix in their memory before leaving it. While you wait, you notice the other families in the truck for the first time, properly. One family, the Garners, you recognize vaguely from church. A mother and 3 children. The father already gone ahead weeks earlier to find work and send word back about where to meet. The other family, the Coas, are strangers to you entirely. An older couple with no children, sitting quietly near the back of the truck bed among their own belongings, which seem to amount to even less than your own. Pete himself, when introduced properly for the first time, is younger than you expected, younger than your father, with the kind of weathered, sun-darkened look that comes from years spent working outdoors in a climate very different from this one. He shakes your father's hand and then, unexpectedly, crouches down to your level and Earl's, and asks in a friendly voice whether either of you has ever ridden in the back of a truck for more than a day at a time. When you both say no, he laughs, not unkindly, and says that you will get used to it faster than you think, and that the trick is to find a spot you can wedge yourself into and not move much, because the road ahead is long and mostly the same, mile after mile, until suddenly it is not. The co-woman, overhearing this, adds quietly that the worst part is the first day, and that after that, your body simply stops fighting the motion and starts moving with it instead. The way you eventually stop fighting sleep when you are tired enough. You file this away the way Earl files away facts, something to be tested later, against your own experience once the truck is actually moving. When he comes out, he does not say anything about what he saw inside or what he was thinking. He simply closes the front door behind him, the way he has closed it every night of your life, and for a moment it looks like any other morning, like he is about to go check on the mules, except there are no mules anymore, and the door this time stays closed behind him for good. You climb into the truck, wedged between your mother and the wooden box, with Earl pressed against your other side, and the engine starts, and the truck pulls out of the yard, past the windmill with its bent blade, past the barn with its empty stalls, past the garden plot picked clean, and onto the road. You look back once, the way you told yourself you would not, and you see the house behind you, smaller already, the way things become smaller the moment you stop being inside them. And you see for just a moment the front door, closed, ordinary, the same door it has always been, except now it is a door with nobody behind it, the way the Pruitt's door was a door with nobody behind it. And you understand, in a way you did not fully understand before this moment, exactly what that empty doorway meant all those weeks ago, on the morning the sky turned gold. The road ahead runs west, the same direction the storm came from, though the storm itself is long gone now, scattered across half the country, settled into drifts against 1,000 other houses, some of which are also, this morning, being left behind. The truck moves slowly along roads that are themselves half buried in places, drifts crossing the path here and there, smoothed by wind into long, low shapes that the truck's wheels climb over and settle back down from. A small rocking motion that, after the first hour, becomes almost soothing, the way any repeated motion becomes soothing after long enough. Earl falls asleep against your shoulder within the first hour, the way children do on long journeys, his breathing slow and even, and you find yourself watching the land go by. Fields you recognize and fields you do not, some still showing thin green, where wheat managed to survive, most simply bare, drifted, waiting for whatever comes next, the way your own field is waiting now, for someone else, or for no one. Your mother does not talk much during these early hours. She sits with her hands folded in her lap, looking out at the land the same way you are, And once, when the truck passes a farm with an open door, the same kind of open door you have seen so many times these last 2 years, she does not look away from it the way she might have once. She simply looks at it steadily until it passes out of view. The light outside begins to soften as the morning wears on. The harsh white glare of midday not yet arrived, the air calmer than it has been in longer than you can remember. No wind at all, just the steady sound of the truck's engine and the slow rhythm of the road beneath the wheels. You feel your own eyes growing heavy, the way Earl's did, the motion of the truck rocking gently side to side, the same motion over and over. And you think, just before sleep takes you, about the wooden box beside you, and the marble inside it, and the photograph of your mother as a young woman in a town she left behind a long time ago. You think that someday you might be the one in a photograph like that. Someone, somewhere, looking at a picture of a girl from a place that no longer exists the way it once did. The thought does not frighten you. It simply sits there, quiet, the way most true things do once you have carried them long enough. The truck continues west. The land slides by, slower now. The engine hums, low and steady. The road continues on ahead, toward a place none of you have seen. And somewhere behind you, many miles back now, a house sits closed and empty in the morning light, the way so many houses across this land are sitting closed and empty this same morning, waiting the way the land itself is waiting for whatever comes next. This has been Quiet History at Bedtime. If this story helped you drift off, a like and a subscribe helps this channel keep telling stories like it. Sleep well.